Hey there, let's talk about decision making and making judgment calls in the field or in the backcountry. These could be decisions that you make prior to a trip leaving that would go into your trip plan or your risk management plan. These are also decisions that happen on the trail, on the summit, whatever it may be, but anytime a decision has to be made based on real world conditions. But what it'll come down to is oftentimes making the best decision possible based on changing conditions, changing group dynamics, changing group needs. So we want to have a plan laid out initially, a risk management plan, a day plan for our groups and for the goals and objectives of our trip. But we also want to have a way that we can, in the moment, make the best possible decision. So I'm going to be referring to this chart. I'm going to put it up on the screen. And this particular one that I have in my hand is actually a laminated cheat sheet for wildland trip planning training that outlines this discussion that we're going to have, as well as a template how to create a trip plan. It also includes a little cheat sheet to figure out what might be the best group ratio. So a guide to instructor ratio, a little bit of navigation, fuel consumption, isobutane white gas, food planning. So great little tool to have. And again, that's one of the tools that the Wildlands Expedition Planning has in their toolkit. So broadly speaking, we're going to separate out our hazards into two main categories, two broad categories. Those are objective hazards. Those are what the environment gives us, what the locations and terrain give us. Some of those are pretty self-explanatory. We also have subjective factors. So those that we are bringing into the backcountry or bringing into our trips. Those are the human factors. And yes, those can be hazards. So those are our two broad categories: subjective and objective hazards. Let's start off with the easy one, the objective. So those can look like weather. So of course, what our local weather conditions are doing. What are some seasonal weather patterns that we can expect? Wind, precipitation, cloud cover or visibility, local patterns. So what is the mountain weather compared to the weather down in the valley or at the trailhead potentially? Barometer changes, if we're able to measure, or we have a barometer or even a watch or something like that that gives us elevation based on pressure as opposed to satellite. That can be helpful. And then air temperature. Some of those things are very self-explanatory, air temperature being one of those, and weather conditions can really affect the trip. Obviously, it could go from high-fiving on a summit to cowering in our sleeping bags, being very concerned about getting out and getting hypothermia, as an example. And then what are our terrain considerations under objective hazards? So are we hiking primarily on trail or off trail? What is the steepness of the slopes we'll be navigating, up or down? The exposure, so that could be exposure to fall potential up high on a cliff, exposed trails. That could be exposure to lightning or to weather. Are we up high on a mesa or a plateau or on a summit? Or are we down in a valley that might expose us to flooding, flash floods in a slot canyon or something like that? Vegetation, so yeah, like, are we going to be bushwhacking through thick vegetation? Are we exposed to tidal fluctuations, that sort of thing? So what sort of elevation gain or loss do we have throughout the trip? So when you're mapping your route, and then what is our protection from those elements, and how remote are we? So remoteness from other visitors, which is really nice to plan in, to have more of a group-centric or solitary type experience. But if things go sideways, what resources do we have outside of our group? How quick can we get to a trailhead? How quick can we get to definitive care if something goes really haywire? So our human factors, or our subjective hazards, are going to be how many participants, so just group numbers, and what is their experience and skill level. So we're starting to build that out even before we leave. Have we chosen a route or chosen an area or time of year that is going to be particularly challenging for this cross-section of clients or participants? Or is it going to be just the right amount of challenge, right amount of mileage that can push people, but we're going to be making decisions along the way and see if we need to dial that back, or we can actually get a little bit more ambitious with our hike or with our climb or with our adventure overall. What's our communication? So this starts from before we even leave the trailhead too. What sort of information am I communicating to my group to set up a level of expectation, preparedness amongst the group? Am I creating an atmosphere where I'm approachable? So am I creating open communication where they can ask questions and I can better inform them? They could give me a better idea because they feel comfortable about medical conditions, fitness, training, gear prep, dietary restrictions, all of that. I want to know that before the trip even starts. Physical strength and health, of course, is one. How physically fit is the group overall? Is this route or is the adventure a little bit more than they can bite off? I would say in trip planning, I always go ambitious, and as I gather information, I dial that back just a little bit. And then dial that back, being willing to dial it back in the field, in the moment, if conditions dictate, if the group dynamic dictates that as well. And then equipment and food. So what equipment do we have to manage conditions, manage weather, manage any technical elements? If we're climbing, canyoneering, boating, what sort of equipment do we have to keep us safe but also accomplish the goals at hand? And then what food are we bringing? Do we have enough? Do we have too much? Sometimes weight can weigh us down, but also a calorie deficit can weigh us down too. Are we preparing that food in a hygienic way? Foodborne illnesses can shut the best planned trip down and shut the most healthy participants down. So let's go through how we make decisions in the field based on some of these. And what I use is a red, yellow, and green light system, which is fairly ubiquitous amongst outdoor education organizations or as a teaching tool for outdoor organizations, guide services, etc. So what I'll say right ahead of time is that if I get a green light in every one of these categories, so human factors, weather, and terrain, green lights all around, we're hiking down the trail, great weather, great forecast, happy participants, feeling physically well, we're going for it. We're gonna take off the ground on that first pitch of rock climbing. We'll drop into this canyon in hopes that we will find water and a good campsite. If I have yellow lights all around, that's go into it with some caution. I would say a yellow light in human factors, weather, and terrain, I might slow things down, and maybe that would look like a red light. If I have a yellow in any one category, human factor, weather, terrain considerations, if I have one yellow light, I'm not particularly worried. But it's at least a heads up to pay attention and see if any other hazards arise or any other variables pop up. A red light in any one category, especially on top of a yellow flag, in another, in a second or third category, is going to be, let's stop, let's figure out alternate plans. So we should already have a plan B or alternate plans before we even get to this point, so we can default to our plan B or plan C that hopefully we've left the trailhead with some knowledge of. If we get a red light all around, oh man, our plan B, our plan C might not even work. The fun factor has definitely taken a dip, so we're gonna be trying to pull everybody out and salvage people's mental, emotional, and physical health. So hopefully this is a handy tool, and there's a lot of scenarios, there's a lot of what ifs, there's a lot of experience that I've had with particular groups in the field that could illustrate every one of these. And short of taking a lot of time, I wanted to just introduce this tool, and hopefully it's helpful for you while you are making decisions in the field. It's never clear. Hindsight's always 20/20. In the moment, we just want to make the best decision possible for our group, for their mental, physical, emotional, and even financial health. Thank you for listening and watching. Catch you out there.